Before we get started, could I encourage everybody to please turn on your microphones? Quite a few times now we're not picking up the volume for the recording. So, thank you.
All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the June 15th, 2017 Transportation Advisory Committee meeting. Looks like we have a quorum. Can we start by introducing each other, please?
Darren Horsemeyer, Schriever Air Force Base.
Rick Orphan, Fort Carson.
Brandy Williams, City of Fountain.
Ken Prather, PPACG.
Wendy Pettit, CDOT Region 2.
Larry Manning, Town of Monument.
Anton Ramage, El Paso County.
Victoria Chavez, El Paso County.
Brian Vituli, City of Colorado Springs Mountain Metro Transit. In the audience, please.
I'm Andy Burton with
Mark Andrews, CDOT.
Wait, Marsh, PTR. Scott Nolan with CDOT.
And staff.
Jennifer Valentine, PPACG staff.
Kevin Reyes, PPACG.
All right, thank you. I understand we had a request to adjust the agenda so the I-25 team can do what they need to do and then get on the road again. Would somebody like to make a motion to amend the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Yeah, I was going to just take it.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you.
Who seconded that?
You want to just do the number?
Anton.
Anton.
Thank you.
All right, are there any public comments for items that are not on the agenda? All right, seeing none. The minutes of the May 18th, 2017 TAC meeting. Has everybody had a chance to look at those? And would anybody like to make a recommendation that they be approved?
Approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. Board of Directors report from actually yesterday, right?
Well, that was a short agenda transportation-wise. The board did approve changing the 2050 plan to the 2045 plan, so we will try to remember to call it that in the future. And Representative Terry Carver was here and spoke on an information item and addressed what the legislature did or didn't do this past year. And although it did pass Senate Bill, I think it was Senate Bill 267, it's still up in the air exactly what that means and how CDOT's going to have to implement whatever the law says, and whether projects that are on the Tier 1 list are going to remain, or whether they're going to have to revise that, or all of those kind of questions. So she was just encouraging PPACG to stay involved at all levels. And that was about it, transportation-wise.
Have you all had, I know it was yesterday, so you probably haven't, and that's fine, but have you talked about how PPACG may try and get involved with that, or is it going to be sort of a TAC level thing? Would it be a RIC level type thing? Or?
Well, TAC is a member of the newly formed I-25 coalition that was created up in Douglas County. So we're participating in that, and our whole purpose is
No, I meant the
developing
267 thing. I'm sorry.
Huh?
The Senate Bill 267?
Well, we will be involved as soon as we're invited and know what to be involved in. But the way she presented it yesterday, and I guess, Mark, you were here. I don't know if you have any details you want to add about how much does CDOT know what they're doing yet.
Yeah, you probably know as much as we know.
Yeah.
The commission's going to make a decision on projects with input. But I think what Terry Carver and even Herman Stockinger had said in previous meetings is, have a plan, plant the seed of what projects you want, high representation and high partnerships, necessarily have to be commitments, but partnerships is a big key for selecting projects now. So with that said, the I-25 project has a lot of partnerships. It's a key project. It's been identified as a top priority. I think PPACG has done everything they need to do for that project and continue what they're doing. So is that one going to get fully funded? I just don't know. The other projects we have on the 10-year list, it's hard to say. They don't even know if they're going to take all the Tier 1 projects and throw them into the mix, or they're going to add more projects to the list. But the bottom line is the amount that we're going to get of the $1.88 billion, you take 25% off the top and then 10% for transit, it is going to go to possibly a few big projects, and we'll see from there. And then the 25% going to rural is a question mark too. Do they get projects like Central Front Range? Do they get resurfacing projects back because we're dipping in the asset management program for that bond payment, or do they get surface treatment back plus maybe some safety projects, or maybe even if best some projects off the Tier 1 list? So I know it's a lot to talk about. It's got my head kind of spinning a little bit, but we'll see how it goes. But I think, again, the message I heard was get your projects ready, establish your priorities, good partnerships, make good projects, and present that through the CAC and the TAC, and then our STAC committee as well, and see where they fall out. Anything else?
No, just keep us involved and let us know what we can do. And for PPACG staff, if there's things that you need from TAC members, let us know. We're here to help with those efforts too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The other thing that I will say about yesterday's meeting is Councilwoman Avila from the City of Colorado Springs is our new board member from one of the representatives from Colorado Springs. She cannot read, and so in the future, we will not be accepting handouts at the board meetings. Everything will have to be presented electronically prior to, a week in advance, along with the board packet, so that she has the opportunity to have it read to her either by her computer program or by, I think she has an assistant who helps her read material. But it'll probably, as we learn more and I don't know how anybody can read the tip and understand it. So spreadsheets and things like that, and something that's heavily intensive with graphics, that how does a computer program read a graphic? So there'll probably be some things that will wind up modifying and so that she's able to participate.
Not being here yesterday, how did that go? Presentations, was she engaged? Did she get the materials ahead of time and
She had read the materials ahead of time. She didn't ask a whole lot of questions, and it was a pretty light agenda.
Most new commissioners or members.
She was soaking up a lot of material.
Yeah.
And I give
Drinking
her
from a fire hose for a while.
give her credit. She has to hear it once and grasp it and understand it. And so that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's take item 7B, the I-25 PEL study update, and take that item now.
I want to introduce the lady at the podium. That is Mandy Wharton from CH2M Hill. She's leading this I-25 PEL project, and so she's here to give us a presentation. I'll also be making the presentation to the CAC and then to the board next month.
So I think we have a pretty general presentation. I'm with a mind to the new board member, and we did reduce the graphics on the presentation, so the same presentation could be presented, and Ken was kind enough to invite us to give a project update to the TAC, the CAC, and to the board at the July meeting. And it's a pretty high-level overview, so please feel free to ask questions if you have additional questions. Mark's got, other CDOT issues. There's a lot of things going on in the corridor, so I'm happy to take those questions. Again, this is a fairly high-level overview. I know a number of you participate in teams, and we'll get to that a little bit later, but we do have, as part of this project, it's a fairly high-profile, big project, a lot of participation by a lot of different people, so there's opportunities for you to participate directly with the project and the people to explore. So all this is stuff that you know. I-25 is extremely important to Colorado. It's really important not just for moving between communities, but also for economic business development. And there's been a lot of interest, especially over the last couple of years, but dating even back to the governor's commitment from his last campaign to do something to improve this highway, which has not been improved since the 60s. So this is, we basically have a section of highway, particularly in the monument to Colorado Springs area, that is original as it was built in the 60s. So that prompted preparing a planning and environmental linkage study. And generally, these types of studies are done ahead of identifying funding. This project's a little unique, and I'll get to that a little bit about how it's been advanced. But generally, that type of study is done to really help define and prioritize different projects. We did extend the corridor as part of this initial study from Monument all the way up to C470, recognizing both the travel patterns that are present.
Oh, sorry about that. So that's one of the advantages of this, is to really kind of raise the profile, kind of get it back on the map, and we quickly found that this project was very much on people's minds. The study limits are, as I mentioned, all the way from Monument up to C470. The southern study limits are basically taking the newly improved portion of I-25 from the last C9 build project, taking 3 lanes up to Monument, and then area into Castle Rock, and then from Castle Rock into Denver, which is really what the main travel patterns are, is really that Colorado Springs to Denver area. And we've got these sections of highway in between and some fairly small areas in between that are addressed. And so that area between Monument and Castle Rock, which is the 2-lane section, is sort of affectionately known, or now commonly known as the Gap. So we've got those 3 sections. As we started the project, we divided it into, we were thinking about it as one big corridor, but it became pretty clear that they all operate slightly differently. So segment 1 is what we're calling the Gap area, and so that's the longest segment. It's about 18 miles, and it's from the Monument area up to just south of Plum Creek. Then the segment 2 is through Castle Rock, and it really has, again, very different travel pattern. Through Castle Rock, a lot of I-25 operates with a lot of local access, both coming south and north. And then segment 3 really is very much a commuter corridor. So this is the south end of the Denver Tech Center and a really rapidly growing portion of the South Denver area. So why are the improvements needed? Safety is a huge concern, and there's been especially a lot of profile with some of the high injury crashes. Fatalities are noticeably higher in the last couple of years. That could be a trend. It may just be a fluke, but there have been a number of very high profile fatalities in the corridor. And there's generally about 3 crashes a day. That's sort of the average of what's happening. So, when you come and go, I can't believe there's another crash, that's a pretty typical kind of day. And the problem with crashes in this area is that there's nowhere to move them. So that creates a lot of reliability and mobility problems. So we've got such narrow shoulders that trying to move the crashes out of the travel way often cuts down 1 lane. And if it's a bad crash, you can shut down the entire highway because emergency responders need some room to come respond to incidents. So reliability is definitely something that, in general, is CDOT is concerned about being able to provide reliable trips, so that that one day your trip is going to be 40 minutes and the next day it's 2 hours. Having some predictability to what that trip is where reliability comes in. And then mobility is a whole bunch of other things too. There's a lot of deficiencies in the corridor. We've got high grades, especially Monument Hill is the high point of I-25 through Colorado. So coming up from the Springs and then coming down into the Denver area, and then in the southbound direction coming from the Denver area up to Monument is just a very slow, steady grade, and that it isn't. There aren't a lot of places of very steep grades, but that slow, steady grade really creates a lot of mobility issues for slow-moving vehicles like trucks and a lot of recreational vehicles that are coming from the Denver area to access the mountains to the south, into the reservoirs and other recreation opportunities. So the focus on the gap has been something that has been a political focus as well as a focus for travelers. It's a place where people feel really frustrated when they get stuck. We don't have alternate routes, so when the highway does get bogged down, it can stop, and it can stop sometimes for hours. That creates a lot of safety issues, obviously, travel delays, and then there are operational challenges in that area just because of the mix of vehicles, the volume of traffic, the challenges with incident management, and then the types of vehicles that are using the corridor. So our schedule in January of this year, CDOT committed to getting a project, an early action project in the gap area, ready for construction by mid-2019. So that is our charge, and we're basically on schedule with doing that. So we will have a project designed and ready to construct by mid-2019. That second portion that it's pending funding is very important, and there's going to be a lot of questions about what that means. So at the currently, this is not included in DRCOG's long-range plan. It's not a fiscally constrained project. How the list of projects comes together, how it gets incorporated into the DRCOG plan and the PPACG plan is still somewhat of an unknown. It's a lengthier process in the Denver area in particular because of the air quality conformity requirements. So adding 18 miles of additional capacity is something that definitely will require some additional air quality modeling. So the planning environmental linkage study is also happening concurrently with this identification of an early action project. We're planning to be complete with that by May of 2018. That schedule didn't really change. We have a big corridor, and it hadn't really been looked at for many, many years. So there was a lot of data collection, a lot of work that needed to be done over that 33-mile corridor. So at the end of that, we hope to have a vision for the entire corridor and then be able to figure out how we could phase projects through in a efficient way and really find those projects that we can afford to build and construct that will make the most difference. We've been completing traffic analysis and roadway design. So the conceptual engineering will be done as part of the planning environmental linkage process. And so that's kind of the May area. And then we will be quickly moving into preliminary engineering and the environmental impact analysis required by the National Environmental Policy Act. We are anticipating that we will do an environmental assessment that will be focused on that construction project in the gap, and that would be completed by the end of next year, so end of 2018. From a big picture perspective, and I do have a better graphic that shows this, but I didn't want to put the graphic in because I would have to explain what it meant. But we're basically getting a project ready for construction in about 2.5 years and then completed construction within 5 years. That is the fastest that CDOT has ever committed to doing a project before, or actually would deliver a project. Maybe there's been some commitments to get things done sooner, but this would be the fastest project that CDOT has ever delivered, especially of this size. So by reference, the planning for, and you guys know this in this region, for I-25 through Colorado Springs for all of the improvements that are most recently being constructed with the Cimarron interchange started back in the early 90s with planning studies. So it took a long time to get to construction, and then that construction took a long time through that area too, and you're still working on those projects.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Is that 5 years from now or 5 years from 2019?
5 years from January, so it's 5
years from
yeah,
past January?
Mm-hmm.
That is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah. So we're saying we'll have construction completed. We think there's some potential that we've been conservative on the seasons, but if we can get a project advertised by summer of 2019, which is the plan, it could potentially be done in just two construction seasons. So we'd have something done before the end of 2021 and open to traffic. So funding is sort of the bad news. It's not currently in either plan, as I mentioned. And we had originally said, and all of the We do have a steering committee as well as the newly formed I-25 coalition that's been helping CDOT to try and identify funding and piece together some different funding sources. When we announced the project in January, there was a lot of enthusiasm that there was going to be new state money, new federal money. That really hasn't materialized the way that was anticipated in the enthusiasm of the press release early in January. So we've been saying that in order to meet all of the plan requirements by the end of this year, we need to have construction funding. We have been working with DRCOG to push that a little bit farther out, but we're still thinking that if we can't get funding identified by the middle of or spring, basically, of about this time next year, maybe a little bit earlier in the spring, that it's going to be hard for us to meet that construction date of 2019. So CDOT is, as Mark mentioned, and as Representative Carver, who also does participate on our steering committee, briefed the board yesterday. CDOT's in the process of evaluating how House Bill 267 would potentially affect this project. I think there's a lot of there's recognition across CDOT and across most of the communities that I-25 is a high priority, but how much money it gets and how that money gets distributed and when that money is available is very much an unknown that the Transportation Commission is going to have to be wrestling with over the next at least months, if not year. There also the other projects that were in what CDOT had developed as a Tier 1 list, which the current funding is about half of what CDOT's Tier 1 list was before. So the Tier 1 list of $3.5 billion now is 1.88, and the 1.88 isn't exactly all new money. So there's not clear really how it's all going to shake out. The GAP Coalition, yeah, go.
Are you planning on a Tiger grant for this year?
No, that's not on the. We have not. There hasn't been an announcement of a application, but we could potentially be ready for something like that.
They're getting ready to open them.
The GAP Coalition, that includes elected officials as well as some of the business interests along the corridor, was formed just about a month and a half ago. They had a kickoff meeting, and they're having a second meeting at the end of this month. They're very aware of the need to find local match money, to kind of find some seed money to try and help advocate for this project and make it a priority across the state. We are working closely with them to try and do whatever we can do to support them with the information that they need. And we do think that if there were another federal source of money, we wouldn't know what the criteria would be or any of those requirements, but this is a fairly high-profile project, so if there was additional federal money, we probably would compete pretty well for that. But so far, we don't have that. Project coordination, I did mention that we have a lot of project committees, so there's an executive oversight committee at CDOT, which is chaired by the deputy director, Mike Lewis, and a number of CDOT executives sit on that committee, look at the project on a monthly basis. It's also being reviewed on a risk basis and a schedule basis pretty tightly, so we're being held very carefully to the commitment on the schedule. So that is something that is being monitored by the executives on a monthly basis. We have a project management team, which is really the doers and workers. We have a technical working group, which is similar to the TAC here. A steering committee, which is, again, mostly elected officials. Again, this was formed before there was an I-25 coalition. And one of the things that's unique about our steering committee is that it includes delegations from the state and the federal representatives as well as from local government. So, again, it has a fairly high profile, and as I mentioned before, Representative Carver and others of the representatives in the state have been pretty active in that group. We also have some stakeholder focus groups, so if there are groups that you think would be interested in us reaching out to, we're certainly open to that. If any of you want to participate that don't already on the technical working group, certainly open to that, so please pass those along if there are people that we're not reaching that we should be. We've had 2 rounds of public meetings. The first ones were in late January, and then we just finished a second round in late April. We're planning the next set of meetings at the end of September. The ones in Colorado Springs were held at Library 21C, and we had really strong attendance at the first meeting and a lot of media at the second meeting, but less of the public. We have Facebook Live. So one of the things that is good about having a project that's of such high profile is that the kind of CDOT-wide things that have been going on in terms of infrastructure and of, kind of reaching out to a broader audience with kind of funding situation and transportation and infrastructure in Colorado is that this project does really feature prominently in those. There are some telephone town halls, again, some of them that are CDOT-wide. The one that was last week that focused on El Paso County, I-25 was of interest there too, and that was actually, I think, the highest attended one at the peak. I think there were 8,000 people that had called into that one, so it was quite a well-attended town hall. People are really starting to talk about funding, and I think there's an education process there about what CDOT's budget is and what we're really able to do. And then we have a number of other events. So I think Mark was saying that the monument was interested in the 4th of July parade, maybe having us have a tent. So those are all things that we're very open to incorporating into our outreach.
Maybe put a hat out on the table.
Actually, that was a kind of a I don't know if I should say this, but we talked about photo radar as a way to potentially gather some funding on the for local match if anybody wants to send the sheriffs out there to stop speeders. And so that was all we had from just kind of a broad overview. Anything that, any other questions or anything else that you want to see that we haven't shown you that we can follow up with?
Are there any questions? Tim?
So what happens if you don't make that 5-year timeframe? Is there money on the line or anything like that?
There's no money at all. So at this point, we would have a project that's designed, sitting on the shelf, waiting for construction funding. I think that's the plan. CDOT has committed to at least get through the preliminary engineering, and I think there would probably be an interest in continuing the engineering to get something that was ready for construction should new funding become available. But the consequence is that you just have plans that are sitting on the shelf waiting for funding, and not having them in 5 years, if that goes to 6 or 7 or 10, the design might get stale and there might be a need to revisit it. So there might be some rework that needs to be done at that case.
And what was the figure again? 1.8?
For the total of the of Senate Bill 267, I think of that of new money, it's closer to maybe you can give a detail on that.
It was $1.88 billion for 267, and then 10% comes off that for transit, and another 25% for rural projects.
And is 50 million of that existing CDOT funds?
Right, we're contributing $50 million a year, and then I think the legislature has found another $100 million that they're contributing over a 20-year period. So I think we're going to bond that total $1.88 billion.
It's the commitment for the payback, basically.
And the estimates for cost of the I-25 project from the gap only, just adding a third lane, 1 lane in each direction, and full standard shoulders, ranges from about $290 million to $570 million at a very conceptual level, and that range of difference there is based on whether we leave the existing pavement or reconstruct those existing 2 lanes. And that number is a pretty big range, and sometimes that makes me nervous, but it's a big project area. 18 miles, and that's a lot of reconstruction. And I can say that there are a number of people at CDOT that are very concerned about the potential of just adding an additional lane without doing full reconstruction, both from having to come back and do reconstruction later and leaving 1960s pavement next to new pavement. And the fact that we will probably be widening to the inside and to the outside makes it so that the middle gap area remains a pretty old pavement condition.
Some of the same concerns that you're dealing with in that area are the same ones that we just dealt with finishing the I-25 North piece with the reconstruction, the things that we ran into in that area where you had failure underneath the pavement. So the things that you're talking about, these folks are well aware of what those are, because we had to keep coming back and even asking them for money to help partner with to get the project finished. So they're well aware of what will entail.
Yeah, it is nice to do presentations to groups that doesn't surprise. There's Jennifer's firm has been doing some focus groups with people about transportation funding, and what was the average per mile cost estimate that people thought for?
I'd make a number, a really low number up. I mean, it was nowhere near the realm of reality.
Like 100 to 300,000 is about what a lane mile should cost.
The public's perception.
Mandy, I just had a question. Could you go back a couple slides? Yes, that one. So this study is going to be done, say, a year from now, and then construction could start 2 years from now. But it says there, so this would need to be added to both regions' plans and the tip this year?
Pretty much, yeah.
to stay-
So the schedule for the National Environmental Policy Act clearance would be the end of 2018 to stay on that schedule to continue through to either final design or to shift up to do a different delivery method kind of sometime this time next year. But if that 2018 date for the National Environmental Policy Act holds, which is necessary to get to the 2019 construction date, Federal Highway Administration will not sign a decision without a reasonable expectation of funding and without also it being included in the plan. In this particular case, because of the air quality conformity, we have that additional step there that is a factor for Federal Highway as well on their approvals.
I guess I'm having a hard time understanding if the study isn't going to be done until next year.
But I would
Just
add
doesn't
that
add.
we can finish the PEL study, we just can't get a decision document for the GAP project if we do an early action project, an environmental assessment through there. We can't get that decision document signed without having the project funded in the long range or the constraint plan, tip and step. So I think we could make some good progress on the environmental document and have it ready to go. You're going to have some delay potentially if you don't get the money, or there's a gap between the money and the decision document.
Okay, so
Correct me if I'm wrong, man.
No, that's good. No, and the other thing that is a factor too is just defining what that project is that's going to get a decision document, because depending on how much funding we have, it may change. The assumption in January when the schedule was put together that the early action project was going to be a widening of I-25 between Monument and Castle Rock. At some level, it was going to be, adding a lane in each direction. So that was the project that was anticipated to go through the NEPA phase. If less money was available and the project changed, we'd have to know that in order to kind of keep adapting to both the design and environmental analysis. So that's another factor of what does the project look like. Right now, the schedule assumes that we might have to revisit that project definition. So by the September timeframe is when we're officially kicking off the NEPA phase, and we would hope to have a pretty good definition of what that project is. At this point, we're still going forward, assuming that that's what the project's going to be, but the funding could change that too.
So you're saying like by September of this year?
September of this year, we're hoping to have a good definition for what that project would look like in the GAP, yeah.
I mean, what do you think our role or our plan is in order to?
Well, in our process, it'll take 3, maybe 4 months to amend the plan, because we have no conformity modeling requirements. So once we know what the project is, and once there's a commitment for money, we can put it in the plan, because the plan has to be fiscally constrained. The tip has to be fiscally constrained.
It's just an addition.
DRCOG only amends their plan once a year, maybe twice a year. Anyway, they're not expecting to have it in their plan until March of next year, with the process that they go through.
And DRCOG has been working very closely with CDOT and on these big types of, whatever happens with 267 is going to include multiple projects in the DRCOG region. So I think there's some flexibility. They do only amend their plan once a year, and they don't want to hold up all of the local projects to wait and see what's happening with these state projects. But I think there is a potential maybe to do an off-cycle amendment if CDOT had a sizable change to the plan. They've done that with some others, like
Yeah, it was
T-Rex
about 3
has
months
done
ago,
that
the
way.
last time I heard them say anything about that. And so obviously there's some people question whether it's Dr. Cog's priority or not. But
Well, that is true, too. I mean, that Dr. Cog has a very large number of member governments. I think it's 36, and they have a lot of different priorities. This is in Douglas County. The biggest municipality is Castle Rock. It's not, compared to a lot of other Denver area projects, maybe not Denver's top priority. But I also think that it's I-25, so that is the other advantage that for sure this project has, even in the Dr. Cog region, because everybody recognizes the importance of I-25 and I-70. And I think CDOT's made a very good case for why their budget should be focused on these major interstates.
Any other questions for the team?
I was going to add a few more comments. Thanks, Mandy. Just to give you an update on, and I thought I'd do it here, the I-25 South Project, what I'm calling the South Project through Colorado Springs. We are getting a consultant on board for that Tier 1 project, and we're looking at going ahead with the scope of a $140 million project to look at widening from Circle to Academy and possibly looking at an improvement between Academy and State Highway 16. Potentially widening, we have to go through the NEPA process on that, so we can't presuppose that outcome. But and then through Colorado Springs, we're looking at ramp metering with a smart system, and I've talked about that in the past where we can maybe use adaptive ramp metering to be more aware of mainline traffic and then side road traffic and adjust to what those needs are to optimize the flow of traffic through I-25. In addition to that, we're also going to look at ramps, especially Garden of the Gods to Fillmore, to see if that needs to be widened or extended as part of the environmental document. So the good news is we're getting that Tier 1 project moving. And then with this project as well, we do have about a 2-mile piece, mile and a half piece within PPACG. And there may be some early action items that may lend themselves to partnering or packaging the overall project together. What I'm talking about is the port of entry, either modification or relocation of the port is probably going to be necessary when we finish the design for the I-25 GAP project. So things like freight funding might be an option that we should look at. We talked about maybe a phased truck climbing lane project that would lend itself to eventually a general purpose lane that could be built as an early action item within the GAP. And so could that be funded with a freight project potentially? If you recall, if PPACG didn't get a freight corridor project or freight project on the freight plan. So there's 3 years left of funding there too. So and then there's some early action items we're looking at with striping, potentially we call our TISMO operations, which is looking at operational improvements that we can make early on. In fact, there's a meeting going on right now to look at TISMO improvements that we can make in the corridor and where we might be able to do that early before this project ends or is ready to go. I know there's a pedestrian issue in Monument, and we'll see how that issue is resolved as we develop the preferred alternative and eventually the proposed action through the GAP project. So things like TAP grants might be an option too. So I guess what I want to encourage CDOT to work with our planning partners is to look for opportunities to combine funding into the main project or early items that can coincide with the widening project that we can do to make it more attractive for, a potential project in the future. So those are some of my thoughts, and we'll look for opportunities as they come along. All right. Thank you.
And thanks again for the presentation. Right. And you're free to leave whenever you want.
Good luck on I-25.
Yeah.
I only took one picture on the way, but one of the resident engineers travels back and forth all the time, and she's always sending me pictures that I can use. I had to have her up her resolution. It's like, I can't use that on a board. So. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go back now to action items. Item 6A, TIP Policy Task Force Funding Policy Proposal. Kevin.
Good afternoon, Kevin Reyes, Transportation Planner with PPACG. So we finally have more or less come to a consensus on a TIP policy to bring forward to the Board of Directors as a recommendation item. You can see the policy that we are recommending in your attachment. Let me pull it up here on the screen. So during our meeting we had last month, we more or less worked through all the wording, and I took the liberty after the meeting to try and rewrite it. So I just wanted to pull it up one more time and make sure we have a consensus on what I wrote before I take it to the CAC. And also there are 3 questions I want to go over after I go through what we've come up with here. So this is my wording. Again, I'll read through it right now, and if we need more discussion, we can go ahead and address that. So the TIP Policy Task Force recommends using a 4-year TIP with a call for projects that could be done every 2 or 3 years. Shortening the length of the TIP from 6 years, which is the current TIP, to 4 years would help project sponsors more accurately forecast the cost of their projects and thus help avoid potential cost overruns. So that's the first part of the policy that we're recommending. The second part, the TIP Policy Task Force can also recommends allowing project sponsors to address cost overruns by applying to the committees and the board of directors to allow project sponsors to cancel one of their own funded projects and use those funds for cost overruns on a different one of their own funded projects, with remaining funds returned to the regional pool. The canceled project would be eligible for submission during the next call for projects. We're also recommending to allow project sponsors to change the scope of work for a project, and we're saying that changing the scope of work cannot entail changing the inherent functionality / utility of a project. So for example, if you are building an interchange and you have $1 million allocated to that project for landscaping, you could use that $1 million to fund a cost overrun for that project because the landscaping does not change the inherent functionality of the interchange. So that would be one example of that. We're also saying that we are recommending to allow project sponsors to use local funds for a cost overrun. This is no different than what we've already allowed in the past, but we're just stating it here. And the last thing we're allowing is allowing project sponsors to use additional money from unanticipated sources and project reconciliation. So at the end of the fiscal year, when CDOT does project reconciliation, if there's extra funds, we are also recommending to allow those funds to be eligible for cost overruns. And so the next part of this recommendation is, if a project sponsor cancels or changes the scope of a project, any remaining funds would go back into the regional pool of funds. Those remaining funds would be applied to other projects in the TIP that are also experiencing cost overruns. These funds would be allocated to projects based on their original score. This funding pool would be applied to project cost overruns on a quarterly basis. So as I said, we are so when a project sponsor cancels one of their own projects to pay for a cost overrun, if they have additional funds after that, then those funds would be applied to other project sponsors that have cost overruns based on how those projects were scored.
Kevin, I think you should say if funding is available. Because not every quarter will you have funding available.
Okay, let me change that. And I guess one of the questions I had was, I'll just jump ahead here, but I guess one of the questions I had was, how often are we going to allow this process to occur? And obviously here we have a quarterly basis. Want to make sure we have a consensus on that. We can do it quarterly, we can do it semi-annually, however we want to do it. I just want to make sure we're on the same page with that. Does that seem agreeable?
It seems reasonable.
Okay. Okay.
I think you should do quarterly, because if you don't, and you could miss a construction season.
Okay.
I can't imagine it's actually going to, it's going to actually happen every quarter, but it'd be nice to
No.
have the option.
Opportunities there,
Yeah.
yep.
And when do you, oh, sorry.
So what if the entity has multiple projects that might be short? Can you cancel one project and apply those funds to the multiple projects?
I'm sorry, one
No,
second.
it would go to the project that you wanted to go to, and then the rest would get
Has to go through the whole.
the scoring process.
Yeah, based upon
And then, let's say your project has a drainage pond in it, or some type of stormwater, and throughout the design process, you find the stormwater elements either over-designed or not needed to that same level, so you change the scope of that project. Is that changing, does that follow your second bullet there, I think it is? Are you changing the inherent project to address an overrun?
If you're not building the retention pond, you're saying?
Right. Is that considered changing the inherent functionality usually in the project?
So we left this open-ended, and I think the idea was to take it on a case-by-case basis for that exact example that you used there. It's one of those things where you can always, every project's going to be a little bit unique. So that was kind of the idea there. I don't know if anyone has anything to address
I
on that.
apologize, I couldn't make the last meeting, so.
Oh, that's no problem, yeah.
Trying to catch up.
Yeah.
We just forged ahead without you.
We did think about stopping because you weren't there, though.
Yeah. Said, what would Tim do?
None of these would be administrative changes, right?
No, these wouldn't be administrative changes, no. I guess,
I think what you have to do is you think about this from the standpoint of having to come in and sell the idea. You're going to have to get buy-in on the idea, so make sure you come with your shot at it.
the thing that would be administrative is if a project sponsor wants to add local funds.
Right.
I mean, if they want to add their own money, I can just do that administratively, but everything else would be an amendment.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
Just catching up.
No?
Yeah.
You're good.
One thing we specified previously when we were doing the red, blue, and green was that a canceled project cannot go to the waiting list. Did I miss that somewhere in the front?
Yeah, so we deleted that, but we just said, we addressed it, but we didn't say it explicitly. We said the canceled project would be eligible for submission during the next call for projects. So that would be addressing that question there.
We're just finding a canceled project as not being eligible for the waiting list. It is canceled for that round.
Exactly. And
Not eligible until the next round.
yeah, exactly.
I guess my question is, do we need to spell that out?
We certainly can. I can.
Doesn't that spell it out? Or do you want a separate bullet for it?
The next call.
I think when we originally were racking and stacking the bullets that were suggested, it was spelled out
Okay,
specifically.
let's do that. So we
It
said,
said if a project is canceled, it cannot go back onto the waiting list. It would be eligible for submission in the next round, in the next call for projects. That's the verbiage that we used.
okay. So, it would not be
It
eligible.
cannot go back onto the waiting list.
For placement on the waiting list.
Cannot go to the waiting list or whatever.
Can't go back because it was never on there, so
All right, so
drop
it cannot
back.
go to the waiting list.
Cannot go to the waiting list.
How's that?
Let's take the word back out.
Yeah,
Back.
it was never on the waiting list.
Okay. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
I think that was during some of the discussions, that was one of the concerns we had, is that El Paso County could game the system. It's using our own words. We could game the system by putting a project up there that we don't think is going to be complete, and then have a kind of filler project, but then we get it onto the waiting list on the backside. So it's a way for us to police ourselves and spell out the rules.
Yeah. Okay, and then the last part of this policy, we're saying that after you address all of the cost overruns for other projects, you say any additional funds after that would be applied to the projects on a waiting list. So I guess we're also recommending to establish a waiting list. And so this list would consist of projects that did not score well enough to get into the TIP during the scoring process. The list of projects would be ranked based on original project scores. After project cost overruns are addressed, any remaining funds would be applied to the projects on the waiting list, with the highest scoring project eligible first. So that's more or less the recommendation here. Again, I put this in my own words. I want to make sure that we all agree with with what I have up here before I take this to the CAC.
So can you read that sentence before the bullets again?
Yes.
I'm not sure whether I got too many twos or thes or.
This part?
Yep.
The TIP Policy Task Force also recommends allowing project sponsors to address cost overruns by applying to the committees and board of directors to do.
Yeah, that just doesn't sound right to me. Does it
Okay.
sound right to other people and they can explain it to me? By applying to the committees and board of directors to.
So all of these things that we're saying that they're allowed to do, we're saying that if they want to do them, when the time comes, they have to go through the committees and the board as amendments.
And are they applying the bullets?
Yes, each individual, it could
Can we say applying the following to the committees
Okay.
and board of directors?
apply to the committees and board of directors to
So right after applying the following.
by applying.
Sounds like there's a word that's understood that didn't make it.
Okay.
Okay. So they're
Okay,
going
that's
to
good.
apply.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Okay, and since you're making changes, put periods on the rest of your bullets, or commas all the way through and a bullet on the last one. Because you got a period on the first one and nothing on the last three.
Okay. Oh, at the end of the sentence.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
okay.
a just a silly thing, but
Yeah.
we're making changes.
Yeah. No, this is good. Actually.
Kevin, I've got a comment when you're ready.
Yep.
First paragraph, I would drop the second line where we're talking tip every 2 or 3 years. I would drop or 3.
Yeah. 3
We're going to do a tip every 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I think we're more or less all on the same page here. Now,
Say will be done then instead of could be done?
It could though, because sometimes there's no money available.
We don't do it every 2 years if there's no money?
Yeah, what are you going to apply for if there's no money?
When we do it, if we're only programming 4 years, we have to program.
I guess we could, but if there's no additional money, those last 2 years would have zeros in them. So would you do a call for projects?
It'd be,
with no
it'd be
money
an
and
easy
zeros?
call for projects, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I don't care one or the other, to be quite honest, so I could go either way.
Say will.
okay.
That means we don't have a tip of 2 years of program project.
No, you have 4. And
It would just
Right,
have
it's
zeros.
You won. Right.
But 2 years would be.
Yeah, then you'd be down to 2 years.
so in the third year, you began, the beginning of the third year, you began the 2-year call. So that you have your application process in place before that third year expires. I think you have to do that. You have to have 4 years in there any given time. So it's just a matter of timing.
We'd be in serious hurt if we literally had no money identified in the last 2 years of a tip.
So with this being said, actually, now that we're on this topic, so since we're proposing to do this a 4-year tip, the next tip would not be adding any new funding because the current tip is in 2017, 2022. If we were to do the next tip, it would still be within 2022. Just to make sure we're all on the same page there. And my understanding is this policy would be applying to the next tip. It would not start during the current tip. If that makes sense.
Can we rethink that?
It should start.
We're likely to have somebody is likely to have a cost overrun between now and 2022.
Okay.
Well, you should have one in 2020. You should start a process in 2020 then if we're going to keep 4 years active, right?
Yeah, but that's 3 years away, and I want the cost overrun portion to go ahead and start.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think they're two completely different issues.
Well, we're going to have a new tip in 1 year from now. But it's the tip that we're currently in 2017 and 2022. We would keep it the same, but then the next year when we come out with the next tip, it would be 2018 to 2022. This would be applying to that tip. So you wouldn't be waiting 4 years, if that makes sense.
1922.
You'll have a new tip.
Oh, yeah.
You can't-
19 to 22, yeah.
Right, you'll have a new tip, but you can't add new projects.
Right, we will.
Yeah.
And that's.
And that would depend on funding sources because by the time we get there, we don't know. So it could change.
I do have a concern with that because I know that you have a project that are kind of heating up.
Well, we could do the cost overruns starting as soon as the board approves it. There'll be no waiting list.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So you'd have to do it every.
So we
on a
wouldn't
case-by-case
have a
basis.
waiting list until next year with the
Right.
new tip.
Okay.
But you could still address cost overruns.
Okay.
So
They may have
that's
enough
a
money to
possibility.
deal with it.
Now, I do have a question about cost overruns. I don't know if you were going to get to it, Kevin, so I didn't mean to interrupt you there. How many times does a project eligible for cost overruns?
We didn't specify.
Well, that's why I want to ask the question now. If you open a bid and you find that the bids are higher, 20% higher than what you had anticipated,
So
right there, you've got a cost overrun that you'd want to come forward. And then 15 months down the road, you suddenly find out that you've got a sinkhole underneath the property or an abandoned gas tank that you hadn't anticipated, so there's another cost overrun close to the end of the project. Would we have cost overruns in the same project?
So one of the rules that we have here, you cancel projects to cover, that's when you're already, you can cancel one of your own funded projects to cover a cost overrun of a higher priority project. If you have a second cost overrun, do you have another project that you can cancel?
I probably wouldn't, but Colorado Springs might.
We're all passive county.
I mean, some entities only have one or two projects.
Right. No, I
So,
understand.
so for them, they don't have the luxury of being able to go on a big list and cut another project out. So, there is still money falling out of the sky that's available to them.
I guess I was thinking we'd leave it open, and then if somebody comes forward for the first one and we all agree, we say, okay. When they come forward for the second one, I have a feeling that the group's going to really scrutinize that. So maybe we leave it open at this point, hope and ask that people don't abuse that system, and if we run into issues where people are abusing it, then maybe we address it with a cutoff at that point.
And I don't think the CAC could let it through a second time.
I think the second one would be a hard get.
Yeah.
So I think we just leave it open for now.
Okay. Wordsmithing. For the bullets that are up there, does their order of the topics imply any kind of a sequence? I would tend to think that, from a regional standpoint, first thing, we would certainly like everybody to pay for their own. Then we'd rather see a project rescoped rather than a project canceled. I'd rather see money that fell out of the sky used before I saw a project rescoped or recanceled. Do we want to imply any kind of a sequence of events without stating that you have to do one before the other? Or do we just leave it like it is and
If you are asking, do you mind reordering those so that it implies a priority? I'm okay with that, but I don't want to make it a priority.
Right.
I don't want to say you must do this first. So if you want to switch them around because it reads better, I'm cool with that.
So if we said, use your funds would be the first bullet, money out of the sky, rescope a project, cancel a project. If we listed the bullets that way.
List them that way, I'm fine.
Now, there's a lot of wording on this. It's a full page, and it's going to wind up going to CAC. I would ask somehow in whoever makes a motion, if that's what we finally do today, that rather than the exact wording of this document be approved, it's the concept or the points that we've discussed, so that if CAC wants to change the wording, then we don't have two different wordsmith documents going to the board. Does that make sense, what I'm asking for? I mean,
That's what I'm trying to figure out, why CAC gets the final say. Not to be a pain, but I am a pain, so.
Well, no, CAC doesn't get the, and
Right, but
if you want specific wording here, then that's what will go to the board.
Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to do here.
And
is
CAC
that-
will have specific wording that they want to go to the board. And the board will send it back to the committees to resolve the difference in the wording.
I don't want it to-
That's what they do.
And I see your point and I understand it. I guess our concern, and I'll speak for Brady and tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't mind them wordsmithing. I don't want them changing the meaning and the
Right.
intent. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I kind of really have an issue with them doing any of that. I mean, I think they had very limited participation. I mean, we did welcome them to be part of this, and some of them did, but for them to look at this document that we recommend approval of and to start picking it apart and changing it, I don't think is right.
How is this going to be presented to the CAC?
Pardon?
Is this going to be presented to the CAC?
Yes,
for
it
their-
is.
For their information?
No, recommendation.
To the CAC? for a
Everything goes to the CAC as an action item that comes here as an action item.
Okay.
And it is an independent committee, and they can do whatever they want
Then
with
I would
the
rec-
item when it comes to them.
Then I would recommend if we establish the verbiage that we want, that we stick to that verbiage, and if two go forward to the board, then two go forward.
And then let me throw in something to help you out a little, or to help staff out a little bit. I think a TAC member or a couple TAC members should agree to go to the CAC meeting. So that if they do have a minor change that is really editorial, we can, a TAC member can give a head nod to it. If they make substantive changes, then we can communicate back to TAC members. Would that help?
When is the
Certainly.
CAC meeting?
It's the last Wednesday.
Last Wednesday?
Yeah, 28th.
Yeah, no, I think it's important
28th, yeah.
that I wouldn't want to be delayed another month just because we're changing "they" to "us,"
Right.
or something like that, or we change the order of the bullets if the order of the bullets doesn't mean anything, whereas to them, they think it does. But if it does change the meaning, then obviously it's got to come back here to be, because I'm sure the board will send it back to be reconciled. That's what
Right.
they've done in the past.
If they're not the same, they're not going to vote for it anyway. So
Yeah.
somehow we've got to get it the same before, so it goes to the board as one document. If
Right.
it doesn't, they're just going to kick it back.
So if these are the concepts, the points that the TAC wants guaranteed for sure, then that's fine, and then the wordsmithing we don't care about, so then we can say both committees recommended such and such a document.
I think if the CAC makes changes, other than, makes any substantive changes, it needs to come back to the TAC, since we're the vast majority of the organization or the committee that authored this thing.
Okay.
We don't want to take it to the board if we're not going to agree with it. If the CAC says yes or no or changes it, it needs to come back here.
Okay, so if the CAC has something substantially different, rather than taking it to the board, I'll bring it back to, bring it back to TAC
Basically, we're just sending it to the CAC and
next
letting them
month.
make their decision for us.
So we don't have a legal deadline that we have to
Right.
force a decision when we're not ready. Okay.
Or maybe what does Congress do? They call a conference, you get some CAC members, some TAC members, and you try to work it out.
Yeah. Now, the one thing that the bullet here that says allow project sponsors to use local funds, that's not one of the 17 bullets or 13 bullets or whatever we had that's red, green, black, struck out and kept. And one of the TAC members, a couple of them, were quite upset that that bullet was in the proposal because it wasn't on the document that they saw the month before. Realizing that it came up in the last 15 minutes of the discussion as we put this all together at the last workshop, but they hadn't seen it before, and even this was all presented to them just as an information item. And so for them, those two individuals, until they get it explained, it could well be a significant issue that we're allowing people to use local funds to pay for cost overrun.
Even though we've always.
Even
That's
though,
the way we've always
that's the way it's always been.
But
But it was in the last 5 minutes of the meeting, and they were going overtime, and there was no time for discussion. So when it gets explained, it may not be an issue, but it certainly was for two of them, and I just didn't get into a debate with them at that point.
And
was gonna
actually,
ask
it's a
you-
contractual issue when they're over in their estimate with federal funds in the project. So they sign a contract with CDOT that says if the project comes in over the federal funds with the required match, they'll for the difference.
Yes, that's what my contract says.
So that's
Pretty
still,
much, right?
that's still a separate contracting issue with CDOT that we don't get, but at least we're opening up
So it's already there.
the opportunity to ask for federal funds, and then you can change the contract to reflect local and federal.
I think that's a great conversation that we had by whoever's presenting this at the CAC. If there's an issue that they think is substantive, that they want to bring up, that they want to change, I think they should ask those questions. And we should have someone there who can answer the mail.
Well, I hope to have a discussion with Jim Moore, the CAC chair, before their meeting, just kind of reminding him of the process and that we wanted them to be part of it, and that they don't really get a chance to go back and, pick it apart and amend it. And, this was a collaborative process, and they were there the entire time. So I'll have a discussion with him on that.
Yeah.
But I'd also encourage all of you, if you get a chance before the next board meeting, when this item is voted on, just, brief your council members, commissioners very well, and tell them what went on, and hopefully, they'll be supportive of the process that we had, our task force, which also included CAC members. So just, brief them, encourage them to, support the process, and it was really a good process.
Kevin has always reported to the CAC, after each one of the workshops that we had. I've always heard a good report of that. So he was on vacation, and I filled in and made the presentation, and two people got upset that they were going to allow local funds to be used because they hadn't heard that concept before.
When you did that presentation, did they bring up any other issues?
No.
Okay.
I think that was pretty much just it.
Okay.
And it was the last 5 minutes, so it was a very short discussion. So
Are
I
they
don't know.
members that were part of the task
So
force?
as far as I know, they have not had any heartburn before because we've had the CAC members at the workshop. So if there had been issues, they would have raised them. And
Yeah.
So were these members who were part of the task force?
no,
They were just, okay.
well, Jen was the one that started it, but I think it was Kevin. Kevin has been showing up I think he's the one that echoed her comment. And he was going to get to the bottom of it at the next workshop.
And we didn't have.
We didn't have one.
Well, as Ken said, I wasn't at the CAC meeting, but one thing I'll point out at this next CAC meeting when I present this is if this is an issue about project sponsors using local funds, technically it was on the list because that is technically part of the note policy which we had on the list. So I'll just point that out and
Okay.
basically make it obvious we're not
Very
trying
good. You
to.
just make that part of your presentation up front and
Yeah, yeah.
maybe stave off the questions.
And
Yeah.
it's already a CDOT requirement in the contracts.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing around, you can't get around that,
No.
Yeah.
so.
And I do anticipate a question being asked, why is the existing note policy not part of it?
For the recommendation you're talking about?
Yeah, part of
Oh,
this
okay.
recommendation. But, I mean, it was kind of clear from the get-go that it really resolved nobody's needs.
Yeah, hopefully at this point that's
Needs,
yeah. Hopefully that's obvious at this point because I've been presenting the progress every month at CAC, so I think they're more or less on the same page.
Yeah, okay.
But I'll make sure to address that next month as well.
I just had a couple of quick little items. I think we wanted the order.
Mm-hmm.
I think we wanted the third bullet to be the second bullet,
Oh, okay.
didn't we?
You wanna-
Probably, yeah.
Sky second, right?
Yes,
Ken?
that was number 2.
Local funds and then unanticipated funds. All right. Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple in the first paragraph and the second paragraph. Just capitalize force, because you have it capitalized
Okay,
in
yeah.
the last paragraph, just to be consistent.
And then the last paragraph.
Sorry, the second.
Second one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And then, did you have one more addition? Or?
Nope, that's
Okay.
it.
So there's one more question that I wanted to bring up. It's probably not a big deal, but if you remember, we had the pool of money for small projects set aside, and back in November, I believe, the board established a policy for small projects. I think I can't remember the threshold for what a small project is. I think it was $200,000 of STP Metro. And so my question is, how do we want this policy to address that? So, for example, you have a project funded in the small project pool, and then you have another project funded in the main project pool, and you could have your small project. If you could cancel your small project and use those funds for your big project, but then you would be taking funds from the small project pool and putting it in the big project pool, or vice versa. And I don't know if we want to address that issue or if we just want to leave it open. But that's something I was thinking about, that just to ask.
Is there a policy about commingling those funds or not commingling those funds? Does that exist when it was created?
No. It never existed.
Kevin's always pushing the envelope. He hit me this before lunch, so I haven't had much time to think about it. There are issues with type of funds. If you've got a CMAQ project that or a Metro project that has cost overruns, and your next project is a CMAQ project, you can't use CMAQ funds on a capacity project. So your next project in line might not be eligible for the funds to be used. Even a TAP project can't be used for capacity. Maybe you could make an argument, well, we're going to use the TAP funds for that $1 million shortage for the landscaping. So that might be. So you've got the federal strings defined for the TAP, the CMAQ, and the Metro categories. Now, we have our own internal categories of bridge off and small project Metro that we have decided these funds would be used for one another. So I don't know that we've ever defined it, that if you cancel a bridge project, the money has to go back on another bridge project. It can't be used for cost over. In doing a call for projects, if we had money left over in a bridge pool or a planning document pool, and there weren't enough projects for it, then the money went back into the general STP Metro. So in this case, if you canceled a small project, or we didn't have enough small projects, the money would go back into the large metro pool. So Kevin's question is do we see some kind of unfairness, or that we've sidetracked the concept of creating the small pools by canceling a small project and putting the money on a big project?
So, obviously, we can't go between categories, CMAQ, CAP, Metro.
In some cases, you could.
Some cases you
Well, in
can.
some cases you could, but I guess I'm suggesting that as a policy, we say we don't. And if we're gonna, like, free up a larger project, we turn in a project and, to address cost overruns, and then that money becomes available for the other projects that are short funded, I think that should apply to the small, small projects too. So every project within the metro category can be, what would you call that? Be considered to increase their funding. So why would we limit it, to short or to small projects, bridge projects and all that? I think once we take one project out, if we're taking a project out to fund a cost overrun on one project, and the balance of that money should be looked at all the projects across the board in that funding category.
I agree, because we have stated that it's done based on their scores, not anything by the pools. So I think we leave it back. Generally, it's going to be metro money, let's be real.
Right.
So that metro money just gets used as the metro money down the scores.
Yeah.
And don't worry about the pools on these rare occasions when we have an overrun.
So the reason I brought this question forth is because the projects in the small pool are going to be scored on a different scale as everything else. So the question I'm really getting at here is, how do you rank the project scores in the small project pool with the rest of the projects, because they're scored on scales?
They're not really scored. I mean, they're still scored the same way, and they're still going to come up with the same criteria and the same score. It's just going to be a different score number. We've given them the benefit in the tip process by having this pool for them, but their score is still comparable to all the other scores. We just rank them by score.
Okay, so makes sense.
There'll be a few criteria when we finally decide what the criteria are. There'll be a few scores that are different for several criteria, and those will be the ones that are based on volumes on the road, population served by the road, or, quarter-mile buffer around it, for transit and bike ped and that type of thing. So obviously, those will be much lower. They'll be comparable from a quarter-mile trail in Colorado Springs to a quarter-mile trail in Palmer Lake, but they won't be comparable to the next ranked project that, is going to be, a 1 mile or a 5 mile capacity project or something like that.
I hear that, but they're going to benefit because let's say we put back $1 million project, and we need $750,000 for a cost overrun, and there's $250,000. Well, guess what? All of those big projects, it's going to skip right down them because that $250,000 isn't going to help any of those big ones, and it's going to land down on those small ones. So there's going to be times when those big projects are going to benefit from the waiting list, and there's going to be times those small projects benefit from the waiting list, because when that number is smaller, it's going to go straight down to those smaller projects. So in essence, they're sort of still going to have a pool there based on the amount of money that's coming back in. Does it make sense?
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, it makes sense, yeah.
I
Okay.
think as we get into it and started actually doing this, we may find that there's some other policies that the group may decide they want to look at, and some techniques. But we're not going to know that until we get into this, start realizing that if we find out that some project is being disadvantaged over another based off, without looking at the scores.
Yeah,
And I like that we've left it kind of open.
things are always subject to change, and this policy can be changed anytime. Obviously, the longer it lives, there gets to be traditional, just like the note policy, and it's not going to get changed a month after the board approves it. So somewhere there's a sweet spot when it might be changed. But, the more we can think of situations that might arise that we can address here, that everybody up front knows what to expect, as compared to me coming forward and say, hey, I've got a cost overrun, and I want to submit a request for more federal funds for it. And whatever the situation is, nobody anticipated, and all of a sudden it looks like I'm abusing the system. And yet for me, it's just that this is my first cost overrun, and now's the time to ask. And whether I'm a CMAQ project and I'm going to take Metro dollars, or I'm a big project or a little project, and the next project to cancel is a $1 million project to pay for my 30,000 overrun, that's not going to make sense. So, yeah, there's lots of situations that we'll just have to.
So are we ready for a motion?
I have,
One more thing.
go ahead.
I think you should really not limit the color of money to how we fix things, or make it a special circumstance that it has to be thoroughly vetted if we have to do different colors of money, because I think that could really be detrimental to the whole process. So just, if it's eligible for that color of money, then we have the ability to make those changes if you choose to do that, and the board agrees with that change, because I can think of a situation right now, if we put this in place, we're in trouble. So just keep that in mind, because sometimes that's the only way things work, is being able to swap it.
Randy?
Can I make? No, go ahead.
I would just figure out whether cost overruns has a hyphen in it or not, because you have it written both ways.
Okay. All right. I've probably on there 30 times, so I'll go back through it myself, and I'll just do that myself. I'll keep it consistent.
Okay.
I can't make a motion, but we do have an existing note policy that we've kind of forgotten about way back in January. So the motion should entail somehow that we're going to end that or replace that with this new cost overrun policy.
Good point.
Good thought, yes.
All right. I would like to entertain a motion that says all of that and takes into account the edits that we made in this document.
Okay, I'll give it a try and chime in if I'm missing anything. So I move that the TIP policies that we discussed as modified through our discussion replace the existing note policy and be as a recommendation to the board with the suggestion, or with the requirement, that should the CAC make any changes to this policy, these proposed policies, that it comes back to this committee for further discussion and consideration.
Substantive changes?
Substantive changes, I'm good with that.
I will second.
All right. Any more discussion? All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Great. All right. Thank you, everybody, and thank you to all who met with us and had a marathon meeting before every TAC meeting, and staff. Thank you. Great job keeping everything in order. And
Thank you.
yeah,
Come on, admit it.
should
It
work.
was a good lunch before every TAC meeting.
It was a good lunch.
All right. Thank you.
Can I make just a suggestion? When you go to CAC, take along those lists of problems and issues and goals.
Oh, yeah.
So that they have that full context of why we went into doing this.
Okay.
Just might help with your presentation for them.
That's a good idea.
Do you want to see who here at TAC might be able to?
I probably can go.
Yeah, I'll be there. Yep.
At 3 o'clock?
Yes.
3 o'clock. Yep. Can you make it? Okay.
Oh, good.
Tim, you too?
I can, but only until 5, and I don't know. Well, do they last past 5?
They tried really hard.
They're
They
doing their
tried.
best not to go past 5.
But this will be an action item, so it'll be probably one of the first ones on the agenda.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll ask that you put it as the first action?
Yeah, I'll try to get it as first.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, if the four of us are there at a minimum, anybody else who wants to come, that would really be good, because there could be questions that
We
one
can
of us
help them get through.
could answer better than the other. Yeah, so that's great. Now, today? Okay. I think we're still good, right?
Yes, we'll still have quorum.
All right. All right, thank you. Item 6B, TIP Amendment 10.
Alrighty. So we have TIP Amendment 10 here. Just comes in one part from Discover Goodwill of Southern Western Colorado, and they're requesting to add faster dollars into the TIP. Attachment number 2 of this item specifies how much money they're adding. So they're requesting to add $112,000 of state faster funds with a $28,000 local match for a total of $140,000. And they are planning to purchase 2 buses for their rehabilitation program. And yeah, that's TIP Amendment number 10.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Victoria and Brandy. All right, Ken, item 6C, UPWP fiscal year 2018 through 2019.
Unified Planning Work Program, UPWP for short, is basically PPACG's planning work program. It's prepared every 2 years. It's amended after 1 year to change the dollar amounts for the second year and make any other changes in the scope of the work. The current UPWP ends September 30th. It's a 2016-2017 UPWP. We have to have a new one approved. CDOT wants it in July at the latest. They wanted it in June. They have already received the draft scope of work that's identified in this document that you see, and they have begun the contracting process so that the contract after 3 months will be ready and in effect by 1 October. We run into the same problem with contracting that you run into, that for something that's done with every MPO in the state every year, it still takes them 3 months to print off the canned document, change the numbers, and send it out for signatures. The new UPWP will reflect a new tip next year. And in the document, I still say that it's the 2017 to 2024 tip, because when the draft was written, we hadn't changed that yet. I don't think that will affect anything. We will still approve a new tip next June, and when a year later, we will approve a new 2045 plan. Those are the major products. As an item of interest, the amounts identified in the UPWP for planning purposes are about $111,000 less than what we've been using for the last 2 years for planning purposes. So how that translates into exactly what contracts and what data we pay to buy, or contractors, things like that we do, that kind of the detail gets worked out over the next couple of years as we start doing that. I do need to prepare some self-certifications. We don't do lobbying. We're drug-free. We're minority business, women-owned business friendly, and some other statements like that we have to do every year as an MPO requirement, and so it's been incorporated into the UPWP as the time to do that. And I'll get those drafted and get Rick to sign them. Also need to identify any local transportation or transportation-related planning projects that any of you are doing. So I left in there what was identified in the current UPWP. Some of those projects, I'm sure, are done. Some may be still ongoing and would be appropriate for the next year. So if you just please let me know what to take out or what to leave in, something new to add. I've heard from Woodland Park, they want everything removed except, and then they've got some new stuff to be added in. So I just need to know a short description of what the planning project is and how much it costs. And obviously, it doesn't carry any commitment, or really it doesn't have any impact if you don't tell me, because you're not prohibited from doing it, but that is the requirement of the UPWP, is for us as a regional coordinating planning body to identify those so that everybody knows what's going on.
Victoria?
Question. If it's in the tip, do we have to put it in that section?
Yeah,
Okay. Then I.
yeah. This is a separate document. So,
Okay. I'll send it to you.
thank you.
And this is an action item, so we're going to recommend approval
I'm hoping
of
you
this
recommend approval. Yes.
probably before this goes to CAC.
If you have any changes, please let me know in the next week so that I can make them and get it into the CAC packet. And
Yeah, okay.
I would like to have pretty much the final document.
So sometime
Going to
say,
CAC.
before next Tuesday? Does the
Yeah.
packet go out next Wednesday?
Yeah, the week before. It's probably next Wednesday, so
Yeah,
in the next
okay.
2 or 3 days.
Yeah, okay,
Appreciate it.
that sounds good.
So the most important thing here is we just need the scope to go forward. That's the most important part at this point, and then anything else, if we find something later that needs to be fixed, it can be amended as always, so.
And next year, there will be another amendment for the second year and the changing the federal funds, however, and we'll do a call again. Maybe you don't have a 2018 or 2019 project identified now, but next year you do, or so then there'd be a chance then to add it in. So it's not a critical fatal flaw for your project or the UPWP if we include something or don't include something for this particular section.
All right, great. Would someone like to make a motion to recommend approval of item 6C?
I'll move approval to recommend 6C and note that there may be minor changes in the local entity sections.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, item 7A, TIP project roll forwards.
Alrighty, so CDOT's fiscal year is ending on June 30th, and so as a result, we need to roll forward the funds in the TIP for projects that are still programmed in there. In your attachment number 2, there's a table that has the list of projects that we're rolling forward, and I think if any of you need a bigger printout, I have bigger copies of that. If you want to have a more legible version, I can pass those out. Just raise your hand if you want one. I'll pass them out. You want? Okay. So on this list. Okay. Do we need any more, or okay? So on this list, anything that is not in green is going to be rolled forward. So we just ask you today to basically agree with this list. Let us know if this is accurate. And I don't know if Wendy has anything else to add, but I think that's more or less what we're trying to do. And
Basically, we just want to know that you don't have anything else that'll be budgeted before the end of the month, so we can make the final list to send it to CAC and to the board.
So a group roll forward. These projects get done in one fell swoop. That's great.
I say let it roll.
There are a couple other pools that need to be looked at yet. For instance, I know that the Golden Lane bridge has bridge off money, so that needs to be rolled forward, as well as a Safe Routes project for Van Buren needs to be rolled forward, because that project, again, has been budgeted the same situation as your Greenway project. They got budgeted, but we didn't get the 1180 in place before the end of the fiscal year. So even though they're in the process of getting to the point of going to construction, I have to roll them forward to be able to rebudget them in 18 from 17. So that's why your project shows zeros.
Okay, so I don't think they'll be going to bid before July 1st.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. It moves forward then. So that's on this list. If you look down here at in the very bottom of the metro section, I have the Group Pikes Peak Greenway rolled forward.
Okay.
Do you see it?
Yeah.
And Randy's projects have the same, the Indiana Avenue has the same issue, so that'll be a roll forward. And then there's two projects that got closed that actually give us money back. So that's where all the accounting came from. Okay? So you didn't lose your money, it's just sitting in limbo right now. Until July 1st, right, right.
So
And then
Wendy,
you'll be able to go back in and have your budget put back into your project and do your 1180.
Wendy?
Yeah.
Sorry, you may have just said this as I noticed this, but I have two projects, one in the first section of CMAC, the
Okay.
Metro rides, and then one in the Metro pool,
Right.
transit planning and administration.
Uh-huh. And they have zeros in
They're all
them.
zeros? What does that
Those
mean
went to
again?
FTA.
Okay,
Those you
that's
flexed
right. Yeah, we
recently.
did do that.
So that's why there's zeros.
Thank you. All right.
So do you need me to do anything for Golden Lane?
No.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you for taking care of this all for us. We
Yes.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Just makes it easier if we do it all at once instead of having 100 different documents and a different request. It makes more work for them, and this way we're just done.
Yeah, that's great.
Excellent. All right, any other questions or comments on this?
I have one more thing that I think we need to bring up. You want to bring forward about the pool changes, right? And the roll forwards?
Okay.
Every year, as you know, we have the true-up for the next fiscal year that happens in May. So this year, we have an $87 hit to tap. And we actually have enough roll-forward money to cover that by a long shot, that $87. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring that back as a formal amendment because we have to change control totals for fiscal year 18. So everybody's project stays whole this year. There's no major issues. And we're going to do that in July. So it'll come back as a formal process in July. And then this will come back to the board with the final list. So no changes. We're good to go. And we'll go forward. And then I'll add, like I said, Van Buren and Golden Lane, because I know those two for sure. And anything else I see, I will send a request to Kevin and to Ken, and I will make sure that they send out an email to you if there's anything other than those other two projects. Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. You have a presentation on here? Or? Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Okay, item 8, it's a brief information item, an update on last week's scenario planning workshop. Jennifer?
Brian says be brief. Jennifer Valentine, I'm a transportation planner. I said, Brian said be brief. He did. Sorry, Jennifer Valentine, transportation planner with PPACG. So the timing of the workshop, it was last Thursday, the 8th, was such that we couldn't really include anything in this packet, so I just wanted to give you a brief verbal update or overview of how everything went. So the only real visual I have for you is this lovely picture of some of the work products or the pizzas that were created at the scenario workshop. I also want to recognize that most of you were actually in attendance, so thank you for being there, and I won't go into too much detail, but for those of you who were not, we had about 42 people in attendance, so we had 5 pretty full tables. We had about 8 people at each table. So we started off the workshop with about a 30-minute presentation that just gave an overview of the long-range plan process and how scenarios fit in. We wanted to provide some context there.
A brief 30-minute presentation.
Yeah.
Brief but informative.
It was very informative. So Kevin gave an overview of scenario planning, what it is, why we do it, how it fits into our long-range plan process, and how we're going to use them as we move forward with our plan. So after that, we broke into those small groups, and we had them do this exercise. So they had 15 minutes to talk about each one of these underlying land uses. So for example, the first 15 minutes was devoted to what we were calling an infill scenario. We told the group that we had a map of what we're calling existing activity centers in our region, and that was based on existing employment and population. We had a heat map that just showed those dark spots of where there are already concentrations. So infill was defined as new development being concentrated in those areas. So we wanted to be clear that we're not just talking about everything's going to be in downtown Colorado Springs. It means places like Monument and Falcon and Woodland Park, and even strip of development along Powers, for example, that those areas will continue to grow, but there is concentration as opposed to just, development could happen anywhere in our region. So we asked people to consider that underlying land use, and then we had a menu of 14 different what we called contributing factors, or for this exercise, pizza toppings, and we asked the groups to come to some consensus on which items they wanted to talk about for each scenario and write some things down. How do you think millennial travel choices or baby boomer housing preferences or autonomous vehicles or drones might operate under each one of these land use scenarios, and kind of come up with a little story about how all of those things interact. What we came away with was a lot of ideas, and now staff has the task of sort of formulating those into actual stories. So our next task is going out to a number of public events over the summer. We have a pretty good list going, but we're still open to others. If you have any good suggestions, feel free to email me with them. So far, we're looking at things like farmers markets and music festivals and just other events where people are already going to be congregated that are not just, planner types who want to reach a broad spectrum of people. So we're coming up with an exercise now internally to get people's ideas on not do we want to see or do we expect to see infill or dispersed development or new centers, but which of these 5 stories about infill do you like or do you think is most reasonable? Which of these 5 stories about new centers, for example? So we are moving all 3 scenarios or underlying land uses forward. We just want to have a good, plausible storyline for each one. I think that's all I have. Any questions about the workshop?
No, I just wanted to say, great job. I mean, both the scenario planning workshop and the goals and objectives workshop were really well attended, and just a huge cross-section of the region. I mean, not just a bunch of TAC members or CAC members, but I mean, there were people that we haven't really seen involved in the process there, so that was really good.
Yeah, we had a really diverse group this time. When I was going through, we wanted to make sure we knew who was at each table. So, for example, we had one person there from Colorado Springs Utilities, and that was a table that talked about water the most, go figure. So we wanted to make sure we had that context. But just when I was going through the list of who attended and who they represented, it was really diverse. That reminded me, so the absolute next thing I'm going to be doing is emailing both the attendees and maybe even some people who didn't attend who we have contact information for with just those initial ideas, just the bulleted list of what each table talked about, because it's going to take us a couple of months to really come up with those scenarios or storylines to bring to the TAC and the CAC and the board. So we want to get those out by email and put them up on our website so people can see the product of their hard work at their tables.
All right, great. Any more questions or comments? All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer.
And finally, do we have a quorum?
Yes.
Yeah, and there's nothing else.
There's no more action items anyway.
Yeah,
We won't be able to close.
We'll miss you, Tim. Thanks, we'll see you.
Thank you.
All right, item 9, are there any member entity announcements? Okay. Item 10, items for future TAC meetings.
Tip delay policy becoming, or projects will be coming forward next month. Probably a tip amendment.
We know that for sure.
It's a new month, there's always a tip amendment.
One more item. So we are looking at, I probably shouldn't say these out loud, but we're tentatively looking at July 10th and 11th, I think it was, as potential dates for the next TAC workshop for the objectives and targets. We're still doing a lot of homework about what data we have, and I'm doing some research about what a bunch of other MPOs have used, just to make sure that we're not missing anything, and if there's any good ideas we can borrow, but we think by then we should be able to come back together.
So that was on the targets and performance measures?
Objectives and targets, yeah.
That's
So
right.
then the
Okay.
hope would be to be able to bring something at the July TAC meeting, if that workshop is productive.
Yeah, so we had a workshop on that, right? And what was left unresolved? I mean, we still had a little bit of tweaking or additions to be made to some of those, right?
Yeah, so the last workshop, we started establishing the objectives, and we got to the point where we started realizing how we were starting to ask ourselves, how do we want to measure this stuff? And then we asked the question, okay, what data do we have? So we've been doing some internal homework here where we're basically going through the past objectives and performance measures from previous plans and seeing what have we said we were going to measure in the past, and did we actually do it? And if we did, can we do it again this time? So I'm doing that right now, just trying to see what data we have and seeing what is possible for this next go-round of what we can actually measure. And so we just want to make sure we get that down well before the next meeting. Because at the last meeting, we really talked about actually following through with our performance measures and actually measuring them and setting baselines. So we're really trying to make sure we have a good foundation of data before we come back to you with another meeting.
Okay.
So the next meeting is going to really focus on establishing those. We're calling them targets this time, but it's a combination of target and performance measure.
Oh, that's right, because we only focused on the objectives or something, right?
Yeah,
So,
and
yeah,
we're technically not using the word performance measure. We're just using the word target to encompass the target and the performance measure. So that's what we're trying to do for the next go-round. But before we do that, we want to make sure we know what data we have so we can have a more productive conversation.
Okay.
And we've also been, per some suggestions at that meeting, reaching out to, I met with the EDC and Chamber, and Kevin's been talking to someone from
Doug Price, I can't remember where he's from.
Convention and Visitors Bureau.
That's right.
To try and nail down the economic vitality, quality of life goal, because we want to include it, but we need to be able to measure it. And so we're trying to see what data points they have and can potentially share with us.
That's a moving target.
Did you, there's a fairly new quality of life indicators report that was done. And it wasn't done by the normal group that's done it in the past. I mean, I think it usually was a United Way effort, and I know we supported a lot of that. But I can get you the name of the person, because there is a new quality of life indicators report, and I think it was published either late 2016 or early this year. So, and it may have some of that information in there
Yeah, that'd be great.
about that. Yeah. Okay. All right. That's all for next TAC meeting. I'm sure other items will come up. All right, anything else for everybody? Would like to share? Okay, let's leave. Thank you very much.
Giving Brian the authority to adjourn us.
Like that.